And yet, this mighty civilization, which sustained a population that recent demographic modeling suggests approached a staggering 700,000 to 900,000 souls in its capital region, a population comparable to that of ancient Rome at its height, just fell silent. Its colossal cities were swallowed whole by the jungle, and its story dissolved into legend. It stands as a haunting reminder of the sheer scale of human ambition and the terrifying impermanence of even the greatest powers. So how does an empire that seemingly touched the heavens collapse into ruin? How could a society capable of building Angkor Wat, the largest religious monument on Earth, a structure that used more stone than all the pyramids of Egypt combined, simply fade away? To find the answer, we have to journey back to the very beginning, back to the forging of one of history's most astonishing empires, and to the hidden seeds of its own destruction.
Our story doesn't begin with a bang, but with a whimper. Before the rise of the Great Khmer Empire, the land that would become its heartland was a fractured mess of competing territories. The preceding kingdom, known to Chinese chroniclers as Chenla, had once absorbed the older maritime power of Funan, but its own authority had proven brittle. By the 8th century, Chenla was not a unitary kingdom in any modern sense. Modern historians assert that it was, in fact, a series of loose and temporary confederations of principalities, a chaotic landscape of petty lords all vying for a scrap of power. Chinese historical texts, attempting to make sense of this fragmentation, divided the region into two spheres: Lu Zhenla, or Land Chenla, to the north of the Dangrek Mountains, which remained relatively stable, and Shui Zhenla, or Water Chenla, in the fertile southern lowlands, which descended into a period of constant turbulence. And looming over all of them was the shadow of a powerful maritime empire to the south, the Sailendra dynasty of Java. Now, scholars still debate exactly where this Java was. For a long time, it was assumed to be the Indonesian island we know today, a theory supported by architectural similarities between early Khmer temples and Javanese structures like Borobudur. Other theories suggested it could have been a kingdom on the Malay Peninsula, or perhaps the term Chave, or Java, was used by the Khmer to describe their eastern neighbors, the Chams. The most recent scholarship, however, has convincingly argued that in almost all cases, the inscriptions do refer to the island of Java in the Indonesian archipelago. But regardless of its precise geographic location, its dominance was absolute. This thalassocracy, a sea-based empire, held sway over Water Chenla, making the Khmer princes effectively vassals, their destinies tied to the whims of a foreign court. An Arab merchant's account from the period tells a chilling story of a Khmer king who foolishly boasted he wanted to see the head of the Javanese monarch on a platter. When word reached the Sailendra king, he launched a punitive expedition, conquered the Khmer capital, and personally beheaded the insolent ruler, installing a new puppet king in his place. This was the world of humiliation and subjugation into which the founder of the Khmer Empire was born.
Into this broken world steps a man whose vision was matched only by his ambition. His name was Jayavarman II. Born around 770 AD, he was a Khmer prince who had spent years, perhaps decades away from his homeland, living within the court of the very Javanese kings who held sway over his people. We don't know for certain if he was a political hostage, taken to ensure the good behavior of his family, or an honored guest, being groomed for a vassal kingship. What is certain is that this time in exile was his political education. He saw firsthand the mechanics of a truly centralized, powerful state. He learned about sacred court rituals, military strategy, and crucially, the potent ideology of divine kingship that held it all together. But Jayavarman II was no one's puppet. He was a man playing the long game, absorbing the lessons of his overlords, waiting for the perfect moment to return and claim what he believed was his birthright. Around the year 790, that moment came.
Jayavarman II returned to the mainland, not with some huge invading force, but with a plan built on charisma, political cunning, and sheer force of will. Inscriptions suggest he began a methodical campaign to unify the land, starting in the southeast at a city called Vayadapura and pushing relentlessly northwest up the Mekong River Valley. He didn't just conquer, he absorbed. He defeated rival lords in battle, but then forged alliances with their families through strategic marriages, weaving a web of loyalty that bound the fractured principalities to his person. He established a series of shifting capitals, Indrapura, Hariharalaya, and Amarendrapura, each one a stepping stone toward his ultimate goal, a tactical advance across the landscape. With every victory, his legend grew. He was no longer just another squabbling prince. He was becoming a unifier, a man who could bring order from chaos. But to build an empire that would last for centuries, he knew that swords and politics weren't enough. He needed something more. He needed a new ideology, a sacred authority that would place him beyond the reach of any earthly rival and bind his people to him with the unbreakable force of religious belief. He needed to sever the spiritual chains that bound the Khmer to Java, just as he was shattering the political ones. And he found the means to do it in a powerful, mystical ceremony. In the year 802 AD, on the sacred slopes of Mount Mahendra Parvata, known today as Phnom Kulen, the source of the rivers that would feed his future capital, Jayavarman II staged an event that would define the next 600 years of Khmer history. Our most detailed account of this foundational moment comes from an inscription carved 2.5 centuries later, in 1052 at a temple called Stok Kok Tom. This inscription, a veritable charter for the empire, recounts how the king summoned a high priest, a Brahmin named Hiranyadama, who was proficient in the lore of magic power, to perform an ancient Hindu ritual. Through this ceremony, Jayavarman II was declared a Chakravartin, a universal ruler. But it was more than that. He was proclaimed the Deva Raja, the God King.
This was not just a fancy title, it was a profound spiritual transformation, and the ritual that accomplished it was not a simple coronation, it was an act of high magic. The Stok Kok Tom inscription explicitly names the sacred texts that Hiranyadama used, the Vinasika, Nyotara, Samoha, and Sarakada. These are not standard Hindu scriptures, they're tantric texts, manuals of esoteric power. The Vinasika Tantra, for example, contains rituals for the magical protection of a king and the subjugation of his enemies, and even darker rites involving human remains to gain supernatural abilities and worldly power, including a kingdom. The ceremony on Phnom Kulen was a calculated act of state-sponsored sorcery designed to spiritually obliterate the authority of the Javanese king of the mountain and establish a new, unassailable divine power centered on Jayavarman himself. The Devaraja cult declared that the king was a living, breathing incarnation of a Hindu god on earth, usually Shiva. The king's essence was now mystically linked to a sacred linga, a phallic idol that was the physical embodiment of the god's creative power, housed in a temple on a mountain. The king was the divine axis of the entire kingdom, the sacred channel between the world of mortals and the realm of the gods. Loyalty to him wasn't just a political duty, it was a religious obligation. By declaring himself a god king, Jayavarman II was also making a stunning geopolitical statement. Cambodia was now independent. He had shattered the chains of vassalage to Java or anyone else. He answered to no one but the gods, because he was one of them. It was a masterstroke. This divine authority gave Jayavarman II and his successors the power to mobilize immense labor forces, not for mere construction projects, but for the sacred duty of building temples. And these weren't just places of worship. They were architectural replicas of the cosmic Mount Meru, the mythical home of the gods, each one a new center of the universe, built to house the king's personal linga. When Jayavarman II died in 850, he was given the posthumous name Parameshwara, the Supreme Lord, an epithet of Shiva, and left behind more than a unified kingdom. He had bequeathed a blueprint for empire. His successors immediately got to work, putting this new power into practice on a monumental scale. Indravarman I, who reigned from 877 to 889, expanded the kingdom and, crucially, began the first of the massive water management projects that would become the empire's lifeblood. He constructed the Indra Tataka, the first of the great reservoirs, or barays, massive man-made lakes designed to capture the monsoon rains. He also built the stunning temple of Bakong at his capital of Ayutthaya, the first Khmer temple to be constructed entirely of sandstone and the first to fully realize the Temple Mountain concept, a stepped pyramid representing Mount Meru. Then his son, Yasovarman I, took the next monumental step. At the end of the 9th century, he moved the capital from Ayutthaya to a new location, a vast plain that offered unparalleled potential for expansion and hydraulic engineering. He centered his new city on a natural hill, Panambakeng, which became the new state Temple Mountain. He named his capital Yasodharapura. We know it by a different name today, Angkor. The stage was set. The foundations, political, spiritual, and infrastructural, were in place. The Khmer Empire was about to enter its golden age.
The seeds of divine authority and engineering prowess planted by Jayavarman II exploded into a spectacular golden age that burned brightly for nearly 300 years. This is the era when the Khmer Empire reached its absolute zenith, an epic of unimaginable wealth, military power, and an architectural obsession that sought to literally build heaven on earth. This period saw the Khmer civilization transform from a regional power into the undisputed hegemon of mainland Southeast Asia, its influence radiating outwards to encompass vast territories. The heart of it all was Angkor, a sprawling hydraulic city that became the largest pre-industrial metropolis in the world. The key to its existence and prosperity was its unique solution to a profound environmental challenge. The region is dominated by a monsoon climate, which brings a season of torrential, flooding rains, followed by a long, punishing dry season. To sustain a massive urban population and produce the agricultural surplus needed to fuel an empire, the Khmer had to master this cycle of deluge and drought. Their solution was a brilliant and mind-bogglingly complex network of canals, moats, and massive reservoirs known as barays. This water management system was the circulatory system of the empire, a work of engineering genius that covered over 1,000 square kilometers, 45. The system was designed with three main zones: a northern collector system that diverted rivers and spread water across the landscape, a central zone of massive storage units, the barays themselves, and a southern zone of distributor channels that fed the rice fields. The scale was staggering. The East Baray, built by Yasovarman I, measured 7.8 kilometers by 880 meters. Later, in the 11th century, Suryavarman I would construct the colossal West Baray, an artificial lake measuring 8 kilometers by 2.2 kilometers, capable of holding an estimated 53 million cubic meters of water. This system had a profound dual function. On a practical level, it was the engine of the Khmer economy. By capturing and storing the monsoon rains, it allowed for year-round rice cultivation, enabling farmers to produce up to 3 or 4 harvests a year, 48. This immense agricultural surplus fed the vast armies of priests, soldiers, administrators, and, most importantly, the laborers who built and sustained the empire. On a spiritual level, the hydraulic network was a physical manifestation of Khmer cosmology. The vast shimmering barays and the moats surrounding the temples were not just reservoirs. They were earthly representations of the cosmic oceans that, in Hindu mythology, encircled the sacred Mount Meru, the home of the gods. The entire city of Angkor was thus a miniature universe, a sacred geography where the king, as a living god, demonstrated his mastery over the very elements of creation. The 11th century was a time of consolidation and expansion, with powerful kings like Suryavarman I extending Khmer influence far and wide, crushing rebellions, and even establishing diplomatic ties with the powerful Chola dynasty of southern India. But it was the 12th century that would produce the king whose name is forever synonymous with the glory of Angkor, Suryavarman II. Suryavarman II came to the throne around 1113 AD, not through some peaceful inheritance, but through raw, violent ambition. Inscriptions and historical accounts suggest that, believing it was his divine destiny to rule, he launched a surprise attack on his own reigning great-uncle, Dharanendravarman. In a scene of epic proportions, he is said to have leaped onto the king's war elephant in the heat of battle and killed him, seizing power through an act of regicide. Having taken the throne so brutally, Suryavarman II faced an urgent need to legitimize his rule in a way that no one could ever question. He chose to do so by launching the single most audacious and resource-intensive construction project in human history. He would build a stone monument that was at once his state temple, his own mausoleum, and a breathtaking offering to the Hindu god Vishnu, with whom he identified. The construction of this temple, which we know today as Angkor Wat, was an undertaking of almost unimaginable scale, lasting the better part of his 37-year reign. The logistics were staggering. A workforce estimated at some 50,000 people, including thousands of highly skilled artisans and a vast number of laborers, conscripted as a form of tax, toiled for decades. The primary material was sandstone, millions of tons of it, which had to be quarried from the sacred hills of Phnom Kulen, some 25 miles or 40 kilometers away. These massive blocks were then transported downriver and through a complex network of canals to the building site. To manage this colossal enterprise, a sizable bureaucracy was required to collect taxes, often paid in kind with rice, honey, and wax, and to administer the forced labor that was the engine of construction. Angkor Wat remains the largest religious structure on the planet, a perfect fusion of spiritual devotion and architectural genius, covering over 400 acres. It is a miniature universe rendered in stone. A vast moat, over 3 miles in length and 200 yards wide, represents the cosmic ocean at the edge of the world. The concentric galleries symbolize the mountain ranges encircling the mythical Mount Meru, and at its heart, 5 lotus-shaped towers claw at the sky, representing Meru's 5 sacred peaks, the dwelling place of the gods. The entire temple is also a massive solar clock, its orientation and key features perfectly aligned to the equinoxes and solstices, embedding the cycles of celestial time into its very fabric. But the true magic is in the details. Nearly 2,000 unique celestial dancers, or apsaras, are carved into its walls, each one a masterpiece of individual expression. Even more astonishing are the vast bas-reliefs that run for over half a mile along the outer gallery walls, forming the longest continuous stone carving in the world. These reliefs depict epic Hindu myths, historical processions, and scenes from the great Indian epics, the Mahabharata and the Ramayana. The most famous of these is the churning of the Ocean of Milk, a 49-meter-long panel on the eastern wall that illustrates the Hindu creation myth. It shows 88 devas, or gods, and 92 asuras, or demons, engaged in a cosmic tug-of-war using the serpent king Vasuki as a rope coiled around Mount Mandara, which is balanced on the back of a giant turtle. At the center, orchestrating the entire event, is the 4-armed figure of Vishnu, the very god to whom the temple is dedicated. By churning the cosmic ocean for 1,000 years, they release Amrita, the elixir of immortality, and create the universe. And of course, among these divine and mythological scenes are panels depicting Suryavarman II himself, holding court, leading his armies, forever immortalized as a god among men. Suryavarman II wasn't just a builder. He was a relentless warrior, launching numerous and often costly military campaigns into modern-day Vietnam against the kingdom of Dai Viet and waging war against the neighboring kingdom of Champa. He died around 1150, possibly during a failed military expedition, leaving behind an empire exhausted by conflict but graced with the most sublime temple ever conceived.
The peace didn't last. The cycle of violence Suryavarman II had begun with Champa came back to haunt his successors. The decades following his death were marked by weak rule and internal feuding, a dangerous vulnerability for an empire surrounded by rivals. The Cham, the Khmer's ancient rivals from the east, launched a daring and brilliantly executed naval raid. They sailed their fleet right up the Mekong River, across the Great Tonle Sap Lake, and into the Siem Reap River, striking at the very heart of the empire. They sacked the undefended capital of Yasodharapura, killed the reigning king Tribhuvan Adityavarman, and plunged the kingdom into utter chaos. This event was more than just a military defeat. It was a theological catastrophe. For over 3 centuries, the Khmer worldview had been built upon the Devaraja cult. The kings built ever more magnificent temples as offerings to the gods, and in return the gods were expected to provide protection and prosperity for the kingdom. Suryavarman II had just completed the ultimate offering, the world's largest temple, a personal palace for Vishnu on earth. Yet a mere 27 years after his death, the capital city surrounding this divine monument was ransacked and burned by foreign invaders. The Hindu gods had failed. This shattering event created a profound crisis of faith, delegitimizing the entire religious and political system that had underpinned the empire for centuries. The sacred contract between king, god, and people had been broken, creating a spiritual vacuum and paving the way for a radical revolution. And it was in this moment of absolute crisis that another of the empire's greatest figures emerged. A Khmer prince, already in his 50s, who had spent years in exile and had been waiting in the wings. His name was Jayavarman VII. He rallied what was left of the Khmer forces, waged a protracted war against the occupiers, and finally, in 1181, drove the Cham from his lands and was crowned king. But Jayavarman VII was a different kind of king. He had seen the Hindu gods fail to protect his kingdom. Deeply influenced by his devout wives, Jayaraja Devi and later her sister Indra Devi, he turned to a new faith, Mahayana Buddhism. His reign marks a radical revolutionary shift in Khmer ideology. He launched a building program that may have even surpassed Angkor Wat's in sheer volume, but his was driven by a completely different philosophy, Buddhist compassion. His goal, as stated in his inscriptions, was to alleviate the suffering of his people, for he suffered from the ailments of his subjects more than from his own. He began by building an entirely new capital city right on top of the ruins of the old one. He called it Angkor Thom, the Great City, and at its dead center, he raised his state temple, the Bayon. The Bayon is one of the strangest and most captivating structures on Earth. From its terraces rise dozens of stone towers, each carved with 4 massive, enigmatic faces, serenely smiling out towards the 4 cardinal directions. Many scholars believe these 216 giant faces are a fusion of the Bodhisattva of compassion of Avalokitesvara and Jayavarman VII himself, broadcasting a message of divine benevolence and watchful protection across his entire empire. But he didn't stop at temples. His reign saw the creation of an ancient welfare state, something utterly unprecedented for its time. Inscriptions tell us he built 102 hospitals across his kingdom, placed under the protection of the Buddha of healing. He also constructed a network of over 1,000 kilometers of raised highways, complete with 121 houses with fire that served as rest houses for travelers, spaced roughly every 15 kilometers. Under Jayavarman VII, the Khmer Empire reached its largest territorial extent, finally neutralizing the threat from Champa and extending its dominion across Southeast Asia. He was the last of the great builder kings of Angkor, and his reign was the empire's brilliant final blaze of glory. But this golden age, built on the ambition of god kings, couldn't last. The immense strain of these ceaseless construction projects, the constant warfare, and the radical shift in the state's ideology had created deep fissures in the empire's foundation. Cracks were beginning to appear, and soon they would bring the whole magnificent structure crashing down.
No empire lasts forever. For the Khmer, the end wasn't a single catastrophic event like the eruption of Vesuvius over Pompeii. It was a slow, agonizing decay that unfolded over 2 centuries. The fall of Angkor was a death by 1,000 cuts, a perfect storm of religious upheaval, political rot, environmental disaster, and foreign invasion that brought the city of the gods to its knees. The glorious reign of Jayavarman VII was the empire's peak, but it was a peak from which the only way was down. One of the most profound and insidious blows was a shift in the very soul of the empire. For centuries, the Devaraja cult, the idea of the God King, was the ideological software that ran the Khmer civilization. It justified the immense sacrifice, the mobilization of hundreds of thousands of laborers, and the channeling of the kingdom's entire wealth into the construction of colossal temple mountains. Even Jayavarman VII's shift to Mahayana Buddhism maintained this top-down hierarchical structure, simply replacing the king as an incarnation of Shiva with the king as a living bodhisattva. These were elite, state-sponsored religions that reinforced the king's divine right to rule and command. But beginning in the 13th century, a new, radically different form of Buddhism began to sweep through Southeast Asia, carried by monks from Sri Lanka. This was Theravada Buddhism. Unlike the state cults, Theravada was a more personal, egalitarian faith. It emphasized individual enlightenment, monastic life, and a simpler path to salvation that was accessible to all, not just the elite. As this new belief took hold among the common people, the sacred authority of the king, the very foundation of the Angkorian state, simply dissolved. This was not just a spiritual crisis, it was a fundamental economic one. The Devaraja and Bodhisattva cults provided the theological justification for the king's absolute power to command corvée labor, a period of required unpaid work for the state, for his massive projects. Building the king's temple was a sacred duty, but Theravada Buddhism offered a different path to spiritual merit that did not involve hauling sandstone for a distant monarch. If the king was no longer a god, why should the people spend their lives building his temple tomb? The spiritual motivation that built Angkor Wat began to evaporate, and with it, the centralized system for mobilizing the labor needed to maintain the kingdom's vast and vital infrastructure. The ideological engine of the empire had stalled. At the same time, the empire was rotting from within. The Khmer system of succession had a fatal flaw. It was notoriously unstable. The throne didn't always pass peacefully from father to son. Instead, upon a king's death, any male member of the extended royal family could make a claim, often leading to constant, violent power struggles between princes, cousins, and ambitious generals. Kings often had numerous wives and concubines, creating immense royal families with competing factions, all scheming to place their candidate on the throne.
This chronic infighting was a recurring cancer throughout Khmer history. In 1002, Suryavarman I only came to power after a bloody 9-year civil war. After the death of Suryavarman II, the builder of Angkor Wat, the kingdom was racked by feuds that left it vulnerable to the Cham invasion of 1177. This political instability was a constant drain on the empire's resources. It distracted the leadership, fueled paranoia and purges within the court, and made it impossible to present a united front against the storm clouds gathering on the horizon. While the kings of Angkor were fighting each other, they were neglecting the far greater threats that were building beyond their borders and beneath their feet. And the most critical part of that storm was environmental. The sophisticated hydraulic system that was the lifeblood of Angkor was a marvel of engineering, but it was also incredibly fragile. Its vast network of canals, dikes, and reservoirs required constant, coordinated maintenance by a huge organized workforce, the very workforce that the state was losing its ideological authority to command. Beginning in the 14th century, the climate itself seems to have turned against the Khmer. Using paleoclimatology, the study of past climates through evidence like tree rings and lake sediment cores, scientists have reconstructed the weather patterns of this crucial period. Their findings are dramatic. The region was battered by a period of intense climate change, a transition from the relatively stable and wet medieval warm period into the volatile and unpredictable Little Ice Age.
This climate shift unleashed a devastating 1-2 punch on Angkor's hydraulic system. First came a series of prolonged and punishing megadroughts. Tree ring data points to 2 particularly severe dry periods in the mid-14th and early 15th centuries, with some droughts lasting for decades. For a city of nearly 1 million people utterly dependent on rice agriculture, this would have been catastrophic, shattering agricultural output and leading to widespread famine. Then the second blow fell. The tree ring record shows that these decades-long droughts were punctuated by years of abnormally violent and raging monsoons. These mega-floods would have been just as bad, if not worse. Centuries of deforestation to clear land for rice paddies had left the topsoil exposed. When the torrential rains came, massive amounts of sediment were washed from the denuded landscape into the canals and reservoirs, clogging them with silt and rendering them useless. The very system that gave the city life became an engine of its destruction. The canals designed to control water now caused uncontrollable flooding. The reservoirs meant to store water were filled with mud. The hydraulic heart of the empire was failing, and the economic foundation of the state crumbled with it. Compounding this, the empire failed to adapt to new economic realities, largely ignoring the booming maritime trade networks that were enriching its neighbors, remaining wedded to its inland agrarian model even as it was collapsing. And as the Khmer Empire weakened, its faith fractured, its leadership divided, its environment failing, its enemies grew stronger. To the west, a new aggressive power was rising, the Thai kingdom of Ayutthaya. Founded in 1351, the Ayutthayans had once been subjects of the Khmer, their culture and statecraft heavily influenced by Angkorian models. But now they had imperial ambitions of their own. They began launching a series of devastating raids on the Khmer heartland, probing the empire's weaknesses and growing bolder with each success. The once mighty Khmer, consumed by internal strife and struggling with a failing agricultural system, could offer little effective resistance.
The final blow came in 1431. The armies of the Ayutthayan king Boromaracha II laid siege to the great city of Angkor. After a grueling 7-month struggle, they breached the walls and sacked the capital. The city was plundered of its treasures, its golden statues and sacred artifacts looted. The Khmer king, Panya Hayat, fled the city his ancestors had ruled for over 600 years, abandoning it to the invaders. But the sacking of Angkor was far more than a simple military defeat or a plundering raid. It was a deliberate and strategic act of cultural decapitation. The Ayutthayans didn't just take gold, they took people. Thousands of Angkor's most skilled and knowledgeable citizens, its artisans, its scholars, its priests, its classical dancers, and its administrators, were captured and forcibly marched to the court of Ayutthaya. This was not just a military defeat, it was a catastrophic brain drain. It was a calculated transfer of the cultural, intellectual, and spiritual capital from the dying heart of the Khmer Empire to its ascendant rival. This act crippled any chance of an Angkorian revival and directly seeded the high culture of the Siamese court, a legacy that explains the deep and often contentious cultural links between Thailand and Cambodia that persist to this day. The Khmer court moved south towards the region of modern-day Phnom Penh, seeking a more defensible position and better access to the growing maritime trade routes. The Angkorian period was over. The empire had fallen.
The fall of Angkor in 1431 wasn't the end of the Khmer people, but it was the end of their imperial age. The kingdom staggered on for several more centuries, but as a shadow of its former self. The centuries that followed are often called Cambodia's Dark Ages, a time of decline, foreign domination, and a slow forgetting of past glories. The once dominant empire found itself squeezed in a painful geopolitical vice, caught between its powerful and aggressive neighbors, Siam, the kingdom of Ayutthaya and its successors, in the west, and an ever-expanding Vietnam in the east. The focus of the Khmer kingdom shifted from the inland, agrarian-based power of Angkor to the coastal regions around modern Phnom Penh, where its rulers sought to survive by engaging in the maritime trade they had once neglected. And the great city of Angkor, it was never completely abandoned by the Khmer people, who always revered it as a sacred place, a wellspring of their identity. Buddhist monks continued to tend to parts of the complex, particularly Angkor Wat, which remained a major site of pilgrimage. But the sprawling urban infrastructure, the hydraulic network that had sustained 1 million people, fell into disrepair and was reclaimed by the earth. To the rest of the world, the city vanished, swallowed by the jungle, its stone towers choked by the serpentine roots of giant silk cotton and fig trees, its grand avenues and city blocks reclaimed by nature. The once bustling metropolis fell silent. It became a ghost city, a myth whispered by locals, its true scale and history lost to time. For centuries, Angkor remained a local legend. While a handful of Portuguese and Spanish missionaries stumbled upon the ruins in the 16th century, their accounts were largely ignored in Europe. It wasn't until the mid-19th century that the world rediscovered Angkor's splendor through the vivid accounts of a French naturalist and explorer named Henry Muhat. In 1860, while exploring the region, Muhat was led to the temples by local guides. Muhat never claimed to have discovered Angkor. In his own journals, he acknowledged that other Westerners had visited before him. His true role was that of a popularizer. His evocative travelogues, published posthumously, were filled with detailed sketches and breathless prose. He wrote that he had stumbled upon a rival to the masterworks of ancient Greece and Rome, something so grand it must have been erected by some ancient Michelangelo. His words ignited a fire of fascination in Europe, and soon archaeologists began the colossal task of clearing the jungle and piecing together the story of the civilization that had built it.
However, the popular narrative that emerged of a lone European explorer discovering a lost city was a convenient fiction that served the purposes of the colonial era. Muat himself, while in awe of the architecture, found it difficult to believe that the ancestors of the modern Khmer, whom he considered to be in a state of barbarism, could have been responsible for such magnificence. This idea of a glorious ancient race that had mysteriously vanished, leaving behind a degenerate population, created a powerful justification for French colonial intervention. It allowed the French to position themselves as the enlightened protectors of a world heritage that the local people were supposedly incapable of managing themselves. The romantic myth of the lost city was, in effect, a tool of colonial propaganda that sought to sever the modern Cambodian people from their own incredible history. Today, the legacy of the Khmer Empire is everywhere in Cambodia. It lives on in the breathtaking stone temples that stand as a testament to the civilization's artistic and engineering genius. Angkor is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site, the primary engine of Cambodia's tourism economy, and the ultimate symbol of its national pride. Its silhouette is the central image on the Cambodian national flag, the only country in the world to feature a specific building so prominently, a clear declaration that the identity of the nation and the legacy of Angkor are one and the same. In the aftermath of the horrors of the Khmer Rouge regime, a period that saw a quarter of the population perish in a genocidal attempt to erase the past, Angkor has become an even more potent symbol of resilience, unity, and the enduring strength of the Khmer spirit. But the legacy is more than just stone. The empire's art, religion, and political structures shaped the culture of mainland Southeast Asia for centuries. The very concept of the Devaraja was so powerful that it was adopted and adapted by neighboring kingdoms, influencing their own ideas of monarchy. The classical dance, literature, and art of Thailand and Laos all bear the deep imprint of the Angkorian court, a direct result of the cultural diffusion that occurred over centuries of interaction, both peaceful and violent.
So we come back to that initial mystery. How could an empire so powerful, so advanced, simply disappear? And the answer, as we've seen, is that there is no simple answer. It was not one event, but a cascade of failures, a perfect storm where each disaster amplified the others. A change in faith that undermined the king's authority and dismantled the economic engine of the state. A political system hardwired for internal conflict and succession crises. A brilliant but fragile infrastructure, a marvel of engineering that became an unmaintainable liability when pushed past its breaking point by a newly hostile and unpredictable climate. And finally, a relentless enemy waiting at the gates to deliver the final, killing blow.
The story of the Khmer Empire is a grand epic tale. It's the story of Jayavarman II, the prince who returned from exile to declare himself a god through an act of potent magic. It's the story of Suryavarman II, the usurper who built the world's largest temple as an act of cosmic piety. And it's the story of Jayavarman VII, the compassionate king who rebuilt a shattered empire and dedicated it to the welfare of his people. The rise and fall of the Khmer Empire is a timeless and powerful lesson. It's a warning about the delicate balance between human ambition and environmental reality, between unshakable faith and the need to adapt. The stones of Angkor are silent now, but they still speak to us across the centuries. They tell a story of a civilization that dared to build a heaven on earth, and for a glorious time, actually succeeded. They are a profound reminder of human creativity, our capacity for both genius and folly, and the humbling truth that even the greatest empires are, in the end, mortal. Our journey into these ancient mysteries doesn't end here. If you were captivated by the story of this lost civilization, be sure to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more deep dives into the epic histories of our world. And hit that notification bell so you never miss a new investigation. From a collection of broken states to the dominant power in Southeast Asia, the Khmer Empire's 600-year journey is a staggering testament to the heights a civilization can reach. Its collapse into ruin and its rediscovery in the jungle's embrace leaves us with a legacy in stone that continues to inspire both wonder and a deep sense of humility. The story of Angkor is more than just a chapter in a history book. It's a cautionary tale, an epic of rise, fall, and the enduring echo of a truly great empire.